Kia ora and welcome to the Niggly Niche Cast. I'm the Diggly Doodah Doctor, Mr. Papatoe Panther, Mr. Slippers, here with the Wobbly Wildcard, presenting a Blackcaps epic, amazing Cricket World Cup semi-final preview. To support the Niche Cache and the Niche Cast, jump on Patreon. We're doing a couple of little activities on Patreon for the little VIP people. Or you can just like, subscribe, rate, review, whatever your buzz is. And we're always looking for a podcast sponsor as well. So heaps of different avenues for you to support the Niche Cache and the Niche Cast directly. Wildcard, before we just touch on this Blackcaps semi-final preview, I believe you are enjoying your Monday. I believe you had a good weekend. And I believe you may or may not agree with me that the Madlib and Freddie Gibbs album Bandana was an absolute banger. It's probably, I'm going to say, there's a couple of, Dreamville's got their Revenge of the Dreamers project that I feel like I might enjoy, but the Freddie Gibbs Madlib collaboration Bandana is definitely an early, or not even early, a midway contender for album of the year. To my eyes, it's a beautiful project.
Big raps, mate, big raps. I haven't heard it yet. I've only heard good things about it from other people, so I guess I better chuck that one on the old list then.
Definitely chuck it on the list. I actually like it more than the Pinata that came out a couple of years ago with the first collaborative album between Freddie Gibbs and Madlib. This Bandana one just seems a bit more tightly packed, and Madlib apparently made it all on his iPad. All the production on the iPad, which is kind of amazing.
Yeah, well, modern technology, eh?
Do you have any recent albums that you could recommend to our listeners of being a high quality?
Ooh, let me think about that one a sec. If I'm picking my pick of the bunch from the old June listenings, I would go with the Black Midi album, which is entitled Schlagenheim, which is, you know, for a bunch of young English fellas, it was a little it's such a weird album. Like, you can even hear me struggling to describe it here. Like, I don't know, real abrasive, real, like, sort of got this almost industrial sound. Like, it's not what you think of as being like pure and easy listening. It's nothing even close to it. Real, like, chunky kind of rock and roll, like, sort of. I got the one thing I got the vibe is definitely, like, even from that title Schlagenheim, you get the idea that there's a bit of a, like, that German krautrock type influence from back in the day. There's also, I thought, maybe a little bit of that, like, when parquet courts are at their most, like, what's the word, like, I'm gonna go with abrasive again, like when they're at their most abrasive. That kind of vibe, and it's a weird listen, kind of. I used the word mathematical when I was writing about it. Like, it's not one that strikes you as being fun, but then you listen to the whole thing and you realize they've got these sneaky little hooks buried in there, and it really does grow on you. Jagged is another word I used. I'm just looking at my thing here now. Extremely jagged. I like that.
Extremely jagged, beautiful, succinct, powerful. Well, that kind of sums up our Niche Case musical styles.
Bit of this, bit of that.
I'm coming out here with the Freddie Gibbs Madlib, which is definitely a more, hipstery. I was going to say underground, but it kind of gets caught up in the hipstery audience. But it's definitely more underground because Freddie Gibbs isn't super mainstream. Madlib definitely isn't mainstream, but he's one of the best to ever grace our ears with any type of music. Like, Madlib's an absolute legend. So, and then you've come out with your little, what do you call it? Jagged.
Yeah, up and coming sort of weird industrial rock and roll album. Debut album as well.
Up and coming industrial cricketers. Sounds a bit like the Blackcaps.
There you go.
There
you go.
Except the wider playing 11 hasn't been overly industrious, and I've just written my kind of preview for the semi-final, and that's where I focus a lot of my energy. Is just assume Williamson and Taylor are not going to score runs against India, World Cup semi-final. Assume Williamson and Taylor are not going to score runs, because regardless of whether they do in fact score runs or not, the Blackcaps can only win this game if other people score runs. And I'm not sure how you're feeling about this wild card, but I'm taking the chances that Martin Guptill has one good innings, or Henry Nicholls has one good innings, Tom Latham has a second good innings in a row, or Jimmy Neesham has a second overall World Cup innings of quality. I'm taking those chances. Like for Gupti, I've just used two different nicknames for him, Guppo and Gupti. If Guptill can get out of form, that would be the most groundbreaking. That's the example I'm using here, is that if Guptill, I'm taking the chances that Guptill has a good innings in the semi-final or the final, as opposed to Guptill rounding off a terrible World Cup for him. Like, it just feels like the more likely scenario, regardless of, you know, how poor his form has been throughout the World Cup, the more likely scenario feels to me like it is Guptill scoring some runs, even if it's like a 50 off 60, just to set up the innings. It doesn't have to be peak Guptill 105 runs off 103 deliveries or anything like that. It's just got to be some runs. That just feels more likely to me, and I'm feeling positive about that feeling.
Yeah, I mean, with the bowling lineup, you can just rely on having two wicket takers, hoping that Trent Boult does what he did in that warm-up game, which, I mean, this is the only time we've played India recently, and it was a warm-up game, so there's almost nothing you can take from it. But I do think that the one learning, as Mike Hesson would call it, the one learning from that one was that Trent Boult just sizzled his way through the Indian top order, and if he can do that again, we're in with a shot. And if Lockie Ferguson can back him up, then we're definitely in with a shot. And if those two are doing that, then all you need is guys like DeGronto, Neesham, Henry / Southey. I'm leaning, I think, probably Henry, and certainly Satner, just to lock it down and not be expensive and just support those guys. And Williamson's just going to have to balance those 20 overs of absolute strike bowling and hope that he gets most of the wickets he needs out of those 20 overs and doesn't use them up too early or doesn't save them till too late, kind of thing. But you can't rely on your batting lineup to only have two contributors, because Ross Taylor and Kane Williamson probably aren't going to have a 250-run partnership. Like, they're just probably not going to do that. So you do need contributions from elsewhere, and currently we're struggling to get contributions from anywhere elsewhere, and even from those main two, like, have not had a big score in the last 3 games, and we've lost all 3 of them, so not a coincidence. So yeah, who's going to score the big runs? You said Guptill. Guptill's certainly the game changer if he can be that guy, because we know what his ceiling is, and I'm sure he's got some big scores against India before, but I'm struggling to remember many off the top of my head. However, one guy who I think has done quite well against India in the past is Tom Latham, and he's done that opening the batting as well as batting lower down, so I think you've got an option there. I suspect they won't change anything. I still kind of think that maybe swapping Latham and Nicholls in the batting order wouldn't be the worst thing in the world, especially because Nicholls is a little bit better coming in against this depends on us holding our wickets late enough in the innings to be able to do this, but I think Nicholls would be more effective coming in at a time when you're trying to pick the scoring right up in the last 20, 15, 10 overs of the game. Again, not expecting that to happen, but I reckon Tom Latham might be that little sneaky pick there of, he's got runs against India before. We know he can play spin. I'm very worried because the last time we played India, I think it was at home, wasn't it? Was it this year or last year? I forget. But when, what's his name, Yadav just ripped through us all with his little cheeky leg spinners, and I don't see a lot of Martin Guptill being able to handle that. I'm not convinced about even Taylor not making a silly shot against those fellas. So I'm suspicious about how well that batting lineup will go. But I mean, if it does badly, then we lose the game. If it doesn't do badly, then we're in with a shot to win and make it to a World Cup final. So there's only really one way to look at it. You just got to hope that they do the business.
Yeah, that's the key word here is hope, because it's a lot of hope involved, sometimes irrationally. I do think that so in the batting side of things, we have to assume that Williamson and Taylor are not going to score runs. So who does score the runs? But with the bowling, I think New Zealand's greatest strength is Trent Boult and Lockie Ferguson. And in the bowling, it's slightly different because I believe those two have to fire to have any chance of limiting the run scoring of India, whether that's taking wickets or tying them up. Because it just feels like the rest of those seamers, Southey, Matt Henry, Colin de Grandhomme, those sorts of jokers are just going to get chewed up by India's batsmen. These Indian batsmen are the best in the business, and a bit of medium pace isn't really going to trouble them. And I also did some a little bit of digging here, Wildcard. I think it came out to be 12 of 71 wickets at this Manchester ground have fallen to spin.
That feels on the low end.
71 wickets at Manchester have been taken, whether it's seam, spin or runouts, and 12 of those came to spin bowlers, which is definitely at the low end, and 5 of those 12 wickets were taken by Indian bowlers, spin bowlers. So then that doesn't really seem like it's going to result in the Blackcaps selecting Ish Sodhi. But that's the type of selection we would all love to see, I think, but it's not going to happen because the Blackcaps, as we've talked about ad nauseum throughout this World Cup, the Blackcaps are definitely more passive, safety first type of bowlers. But I just don't want to see a whole lot of right arm medium pace, because that doesn't seem conducive to taking wickets. And if the Blackcaps are unable to roll India, and by roll I mean simply take 10 wickets, it doesn't matter about the runs, but just take 10 wickets, they will, if they can't do that, it places huge pressure on the batsman. And if there's one glaring weakness of this Blackcaps team, as we've just talked about, it's the batsmen and their lack of runs. And yeah, I just think it's the Trent Boult, Lockie Ferguson show with the ball, and then I'd be happy to see a curveball thrown in there with Ish Sodhi, and a better reference there is I'd be happy to see a Doosra chucked in just to shake things up with the Blackcaps bowling attack, because I think it can be a bit stock standard, status quo, and I'm actually using those spin stats to counter myself, because if both teams would have done similar research, and then India will be looking at the Blackcaps lineup and they'll think their major strength is their seam bowling. And I think if there is going to be one Doosra, one X Factor chucked in just for the semi-final, just to go all out, I can definitely see a scenario where Ish Sodhi is selected, and like a bowling attack consisting of Ish Sodhi, Mitchell Santner, Trent Boult, Lockie Ferguson, for bowlers like that, and then you've got Jimmy Neesham and perhaps Colin de Grandhomme as well. That seems more well-rounded, a bit more variety to deal with different situations, different bowlers, and it just gives the Blackcaps a few more options. How are you feeling about that idea about Trent Boult and Lockie Ferguson being the straight up and down key bowlers, and then do you see any other bowling attack selection aspects? Just one more point, because especially in that last game, suddenly we had Tim Southey and Matt Henry in the bowling attack. So it's like as of right now, we don't know. Is Tim Southey actually going to bowl in a semi-final? Is Matt Henry actually going to bowl in a semi-final? So I think there's a lot more conjecture around the makeup of the bowling attack for this game than many people probably think there is.
Yeah, and the bowling attack's probably the only one that's sort of up for grabs in any way, because we've pretty much come around to the fact that Munro isn't going to be playing this game. Means Henry Nicholls is 95% likely to be opening, and if he's not, he'll be batting at 5 with Latham opening. I still don't think that'll happen, but yeah, one more time, you wouldn't get any arguments from me if it did. You also wouldn't get any arguments from me if Ish Sodhi comes in, but again, like you, I suspect that isn't going to happen. I mean, on the basis of last game, I don't think you can pick Tim Southey. It's just he was too slow, to sort of like out of rhythm, and I mean, you're back an experienced player to step it up. He's played in a couple World Cup semi-finals before in his career. Matt Henry's played in one as well, but I mean, yeah, skeptical that would work. I also just don't trust Matt Henry against India unless he can really get the ball to nip around. I don't see him being a threat. But having said that, maybe it will nip around. Like, I mean, Manchester, you're playing a little further north. It's not a bad option for the Blackcaps. I don't think that part of it has worked out terribly for them. Certainly going to be a wicket that's a bit more fair. I don't know where they're playing the other semi-final, but compared to some of the other games at this tournament, should be one of the grounds that are a little more in favour to New Zealand rather than India. However, as soon as you play India, you know you're going to pack out every single stadium like it's an Indian home ground. So that's obviously a bit of a factor as well. Doesn't hurt the Blackcaps though, in that they've got this whole thing, which I think is the reason I think the Blackcaps have a chance in this game, is because they've got absolutely no pressure on them. India have a lot of pressure on them. India are expected to win this World Cup. New Zealand weren't even necessarily expected to make the semi-finals, so they got nothing to lose. They've lost 3 games coming into this, so everyone thinks they're a little bit rubbish at the moment, and they're, fair enough in thinking that. However, we know that Blackcaps have more room to improve. We know what they've showed with that, not so much of this tournament, but in recent times, mostly when they're playing at home, let's be honest, but they have had a couple decent tours where they've shown that this team has a very high upside if the right guys fire at the right time, and that does include the bowlers, because Ferguson and Bolt, there's just no doubt about it. They have to not only bowl well, they have to take wickets. And you look at this Indian batting lineup, and Rohit Sharma scored 5 centuries at this World Cup, which is unfathomable. 5 centuries at a World Cup. We got to get that bugger out nice and early, and that falls entirely on Trent Bolt's shoulders, because Ferguson isn't going to be opening the bowling, and if he's coming on in the 10th over, there's a little bit of worry that some damage might have already been done if they're cruising at 60 without loss kind of thing. So Bolt has got to be the guy. We need 4 or 5 wickets from him. But the thing with Trent Bolt is that's possible. He can do that. In fact, he did that not very long ago against India in that warm-up game. So there's hope there. I know they'll have done a lot of studying. They'll be knowing that Bolt is the guy that they have to be fearful of. But it's one thing knowing that you shouldn't get out to this guy. It's another thing actually not getting out to it when the ball's angling in and then seaming away from you, and a little bit of swing in the process. It's not easy, especially when he's able to get the ball to straighten up on you as well. So if you're looking at that, I mean, the early wicket breaking that opening partnership, same as the deal was against Australia, which we did but weren't able to capitalise later on, same as the deal was against England, which we failed to do and therefore lost the game. Getting that first wicket is a big deal. I'm not sure if, I almost wonder if we should bowl first for that reason, but I always, at the same time, the recent trend of this World Cup has been that teams have been pretty good at defending totals, and India are as good as it gets at chasing totals, so I guess it's up to the conditions on the day, because I can't really see how that, I can't really see a favourable side for us on either side of that equation. But yeah, Ferguson as well has just got to be, because we can't let you remember that game, was it 2003 or 2007? I can't remember. I think it might have been 2003. Shane Bond bowled the spell of his life against Australia. It took 6 for 20 something, and then we had them absolutely lingering. And then he finished off his 10 overs straight off the bat, and I think Aussie immediately had a massive partnership that took the game away from us, and then they skittled us and won it. We can't have a situation like that where Trent Bolt comes out. He could take 4 or 5 wickets early on, and then nothing else happens, and India get away, and MS Dhoni has a big score, or Virat Kohli hangs in there and gets a big score. You have to be able to attack from both ends. Lockie Ferguson is essential. We can get away with being defensive a bit more with the other guys, but we have to be taking wickets from those 2 strike bowlers. It's difficult, but I don't know. At first, I thought when Australia lost that game to South Africa, I thought, well, this is a bugger, because we've seen that we were at least competitive against Australia. We were 1 wicket away from getting them out for a chaseable total, potentially. And suddenly we've got to play India, who've looked just imperious the whole way through. I almost wonder now if maybe we don't match up a little bit better against India than we do against Australia. I'm not so sure about that one anymore. Like, what are your feelings on that? Would you rather have played Aussie, or are you happy with India, or do you think it just doesn't matter?
I'm definitely in the it doesn't matter category, but that's with a caveat that the Blackcaps, regardless of who their opposition is, they are in the perfect spot for a Blackcaps team to be in. And to be honest, it's a perfect spot for any Kiwi sports team, perhaps other than the All Blacks, to be in. When you have made it to the semi-final of your World Cup and you are the underdog. That is where Kiwis are comfortable. That's where Kiwis make their brekkie. That's life for us. We're just living as the underdog. Everything we do is the underdog. And the way everything has fallen throughout this World Cup has directly led to the Blackcaps being in the semi-final, but being in the semi-final as a severe underdog, where everyone's just talking shit about the Blackcaps, 3 losses in a row. Like, I'm of the belief that the tournament starts now. So the 3 losses don't mean anything because you're in finals cricket and you, like, yeah, of course, like, form can stay through that line in the sand, so guys can still be in poor form or whatever. But when you're looking at it from a tournament perspective, the round robin's over. Now it's semi-final stage, and all that matters is what you do in the semi-finals. So from a mental perspective, you can say, oh, fuck whatever happened before. I'm just going to focus on my best performance in this game. And I don't have any weight behind the fact that the Blackcaps come into the semi-finals with 3 losses. I view it as a good thing because now that puts them in the underdog category, knowing that they only have to do a job in the semi-final to make a Cricket World Cup final. So I think in a strange roundabout way, everything has worked out perfectly for the Blackcaps. Sure, we don't need to go down the whole route of annoying selections and any just weird antic shenanigans from those involved. But if you just look at it, like, the Blackcaps could have been in the semi-final and they could have won their last 3 games handsomely, and then suddenly they're first or second in the semi-final and everyone's talking up the Blackcaps. And then there's pressure on the Blackcaps, but they're still facing Australia, India and England. And it's like they should be the favourites because they're playing well, but they're not the favourites because all the other teams are better than them. Whereas whatever happened over the past week and a bit, maybe 2 weeks, has put the Blackcaps in a really, really nice spot where India, Australia and England, everyone is talking about those teams, and no one's really given the Blackcaps any chance to beat India. And from a Kiwi perspective, that's exactly where we want to be. So it's I don't know, this whole World Cup's been bloody strange wildcard, and this is just another weird wrinkle to a very weird World Cup.
It has been a weird World Cup, and it looked after 2 weeks like the top 4 was just absolutely set in stone there, and then all of a sudden, you know, Bangladesh get a couple nice wins, Pakistan get a couple nice wins. You have, England losing a couple games, and suddenly she's all on. And New Zealand lose a trio of games towards the end, and it comes down to the last day almost, or the second to last day with that Pakistan Bangladesh game. And Pakistan were never going to overturn that, but you know, there was still a feasible chance. Like, it just when you thought it was really obvious which way everything was going, suddenly this World Cup just spun 180 and got real interesting all of a sudden. And just as you think this semi-final looks pretty much a foregone conclusion, you know, exactly what this World Cup would expect and what it would deserve is just a wild performance from New Zealand to at least push India extremely close, if not to win. Like, at least make it a very competitive game. And we've got that in our DNA. You know, we didn't actually play particularly great against West Indies or South Africa, but we managed to win very close games, and the Bangladesh result as well, because Bangladesh, some of their later performances made that win early on look a lot better than it did at the time. Like, those 3 results were not clinical, easygoing wins from the Blackcaps, but they were wins, and they found a way when it got very difficult. And this was against teams that made some mistakes that allowed, especially in the field, South Africa and West Indies let themselves down pretty significantly in those aspects. But like, you know, the Black Caps were able to win an ugly game, and that is almost more important coming into these ones, because you know you're not going to get the same mistakes. You're going to have to play at a much higher level to compete with India, but if it gets ugly, we do know how to do that. So that's a nice little thing to have up your sleeve. I'm also going to chuck in what I said last time again, which is that those three results, the three defeats that the Black Caps had, I mean, they felt really comprehensive, but I think they were a lot closer than that felt at the time watching it. I think if we had got an early wicket instead of letting Bairstow and Roy get off to a big partnership at the start against England, we saw they didn't have another substantial partnership for the rest of that innings. Like, if we'd gotten an early wicket, if the Santner opened the bowling trick, if that had paid off and we'd snuck one through or something, or if one of those arm balls had managed to catch a front pad in front of the stumps or whatever, that could have been a completely different game. I think maybe we were one wicket, even though it felt like we were behind the whole way because of that opening partnership they got away from us. If we got one early wicket, that could have been a different story. Against Australia, really obvious. They were 90-odd for 5 or whatever it was, and Khawaja and Carey just had a big partnership and took it away from us, got them to a competitive total, and then we couldn't handle the swing of Mitchell Starc. So let's say, well, I mean, even if we'd kept them to 150 or something, we might still have had enormous trouble with Mitchell Starc and not gotten there. But that's a competitive game there, which wasn't quite the case as it happened. If we had been able to get that wicket, break that partnership, I think it was the 6th wicket partnership, if we'd been able to break that earlier. And even against Pakistan, 1 wicket, if we'd got Babar Azam out and he hadn't gone on to score 100, Pakistan looked incredible until they looked terrible. If we'd gotten that wicket, putting them under pressure, they could easily have crumbled. I don't think the Black Caps are as far away as it looks. The big problem is that I don't know if they can score the runs against India, but you got to bank on the fact that it could just be, this is exactly how you started the podcast too, it could just be Martin Guptill's lucky day on Tuesday night. It could be Henry Nicholls' lucky day. It could be the greatest day of Tom Latham's life. Kane Williamson could play an absolute blinder. Ross Taylor could score a brilliant century. Like, these things can happen. Jimmy Neesham could come in at the end and be the difference by scoring 50 off 25 just in the last 5 overs or something. Like, these things are possible, and I guess, yeah, the theme of the day, you just got to hope that that's the case.
Just hope that is the case, Wildcard. Any other thoughts, or should we wrap it up there for the Black Caps World Cup semi-final preview? Wow.
Well, how do you feel about the net run rate versus head-to-head thing?
Oh, I couldn't care less, to be honest.
I mean, it's the way that it was coming into the tournament, so no one can really complain about it. It is a little funky that, we ended level on points with Pakistan, who beat us, and then they're the ones who go out. But I think what's really interesting about that is, like, I think I'm with you. Like, I don't really care how they tie-break things, because you got to tie-break them one way or another, and it's never going to be perfect, so everyone knows the score before things start. You just do what you do. I think what's really interesting about that is the fact that the reason those two teams ended on the similar things isn't so much the head-to-head or the net run. It's because Pakistan had a game rained off against Sri Lanka, which you would have backed them to win. New Zealand had a game rained off against India, which you would have backed them to lose. So if those games have been played, pretty good chance Pakistan end up with an extra win and they're ahead of us, and into the semi-finals to play, well, probably to play India, which would have been, I mean, the biggest viewership for a sporting event in the history of humanity, probably. But as it happens, we got rain on the right day against India, and that was, I mean, all the sort of rough luck and the weirdness that the Black Caps have gone through for the last few weeks. That rained-off game against India is the best thing that could have ever happened to them, because that's now the reason that they made the semi-finals instead of finishing 5th. And it's pretty funky that, coincidence would have it, we now play that team who we missed out on playing in the group stage in the semi-final that we qualified for because we didn't play them in the group stages. Written in the stars, Doc.
It is, and, like, just to go back to the people complaining about the net run rate and all of that. Like, people were complaining after a couple of games got rained off, and everyone was doom and gloom about the scheduling and all that could be wrong. Like, people just got to stop complaining. And then it's definitely the way things have unfolded. As I said before, the Blackcaps are meant to be in this position. There's a whole
the same way.
There's a whole long list of stuff that has happened to put the Blackcaps into this position where not only are they in the semi-final, but they're in a semi-final position from a very comfortable standpoint. They haven't overstretched themselves to be in a spot where the Blackcaps can be a bit iffy. Like, we don't really know a universe in which the Blackcaps live as favourites, which is good. Because, as I said, it's in our Kiwi DNA to be the underdog. So I just think everything's worked out beautifully. And if it hasn't worked out for you, your team and your country, well, hard luck, mate. So Blackcaps semi-final against India, Tuesday night, overnight Tuesday.
That is the one. I believe it's a 9:30 start as well.
Beautiful. Wildcard. We'll probably come back on the Wednesday and offer our a reaction to a loss or a win, like a small digest of the World Cup, or a little teaser of a World Cup final preview. Fork in the road moment, Wildcard. We'll be back. Take care. Ciao. Later, boat. Toodles.